Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're unpacking something pretty complex and, frankly, often misunderstood. It's this whole issue around potential U.S. military action in Mexico. It impacts a huge part of North America, and you probably hear bits and pieces in the news, right? But we're going to try and pull back the curtain, really look at the whole picture. So our mission here is to really immerse ourselves in the sources you've given us. We want to pull out the key info, maybe uncover some surprising things, and just lay out all the different angles on this very sensitive topic. The aim is to give you a clear, comprehensive understanding, cut through the noise, maybe get you to those aha moments that connect the dots. Okay, so to really get this, we probably need to start with what's happening right now, like on the ground. What is the U.S. actually doing at the southern border? Well, for starters, the U.S. is setting up two national defense areas right along the Texas-Mexico border. And these aren't just lines on a map. They're specific zones designated for military operations. They allow things like temporary military detentions of migrants, trespassers.
And what's really notable, I think, is that this approach, it kind of bypasses the need to use the 1807 Insurrection Act.
Right. Which is the usual legal path for using federal troops inside the U.S. for law enforcement. This is different.
Exactly. It feels like a significant sidestep, giving the military more authority in this context.
Yeah.
And just for scale, we're talking about roughly 11,900 U.S. troops deployed to border ops right now.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, I think, is how these actions immediately start to reshape the conversation around the military's role, well, domestically. Setting up these national defense areas, allowing military detentions without invoking the Insurrection Act, that's not a small thing, it's a shift. It definitely signals maybe a testing or even redefining of those internal legal lines.
Yeah.
And it certainly affects how the public sees the military's role, even if it's tied to the border.
And when you say redefining, what are the potential long-term implications, do you think, bypassing something like the Insurrection Act for these kinds of operations?
That's a really key question. It does set a precedent, doesn't it? I mean, even if it's framed as temporary right now, it shows a willingness to use military assets in a way that, well, traditionally required a higher legal threshold. So for you listening, it raises that question. How easily could these kinds of exceptions become more normal, especially if they're framed under, national defense? It's a tangible step in that evolving military-civilian dynamic.
Okay, so those are the current border actions, but that's just part of it. The policy debate really heats up when you look at the very different ideas for how much deeper the U.S. should get involved in Mexico. There's a whole range of proposals being talked about in U.S. policy circles.
Okay.
Everything from military aid all the way to full-on intervention. So on one side, you've got Representative Dan Crenshaw. His plan is more like a counterinsurgency approach. It's about the U.S. providing training, equipment, intelligence support to Mexico. But, and this is crucial, the plan explicitly says no direct troop deployment, no U.S. boots on the ground.
Right, and it comes with a condition from Mexico's President Sheinbaum, too.
Yeah, exactly. She's indicated openness to aid like that, but with strong oversight, needs to prevent corruption.
Which makes sense. Control and accountability.
Okay, so that's one end, aid and support. But then on the other end of the spectrum, things get much more aggressive. You have former President Trump reportedly urging Mexico to let U.S. forces operate inside Mexico.
Yeah, reports mention discussions even including things like drone strikes.
And Mexico's reaction?
Unequivocal. A firm no. They see it as a violation of their national sovereignty. That's the absolute red line for them.
So if we step back and connect these dots, what does this spectrum tell us?
Well, it highlights a fundamental tension, doesn't it? The U.S. is clearly driven by concerns about, say, fentanyl trafficking, cross-border crime. They see Mexico as central to fixing that, so proposals like Crenshaw's try to tackle it by helping Mexico build capacity. It's more collaborative, at least on the surface. But the other suggestions, the push for direct action, that shows a much more, interventionist impulse, a desire for quick, decisive U.S. strikes. And what's really striking is Mexico's unwavering position. For them, any foreign military operating on their soil without consent, especially strikes. That's not just politics. It hits right at their national integrity. It's deeply tied to their history, their identity.
Can you elaborate on that historical aspect a bit more?
Sure. I mean, Mexico has a long history of foreign interventions. The Spanish, the French, multiple U.S. incursions. Sovereignty isn't just a word in their constitution. It's a lesson learned the hard way over centuries. So defending it is paramount. It's almost instinctual in their foreign policy.
That's a really powerful context. But thinking about the aid side, is there a risk that even things like aid and intelligence could subtly chip away at sovereignty? If Mexico feels too dependent, maybe?
Absolutely, that's a valid concern. While it looks like cooperation, any aid relationship needs careful handling. If the power balance shifts too much, or if the aid comes with too many strings attached, it can create a kind of dependency over time. It might compromise the spirit of sovereign decision-making.
I see.
And that's precisely why President Scheinbaum's point about strong oversight is so important. It's not just about corruption, it's also about ensuring Mexican control, preventing that external influence from becoming too dominant.
Okay, so given these strong, often opposing views, the big question is, what's stopping unilateral U.S. military action? Because the sources suggest there are some major roadblocks. Oh, first off, you've got huge legal and diplomatic barriers. Unilateral U.S. military action would likely violate international law, the UN Charter specifically, and probably U.S. constitutional limits too.
That's massive. International law isn't just suggestion.
Right, and any strike on Mexican soil without their clear consent, Mexico would almost certainly see that as an act of war.
Yeah, you can't just bomb another country because you want to.
The potential fallout is severe too. You risk collapsing intelligence sharing, which is vital.
Ugh.
You jeopardize cross-border cooperation on everything,
Mm-hmm.
and the U.S. could end up diplomatically isolated. And then there are the strategic risks. The warnings are pretty stark.
Mm-hmm. What do the experts say there?
Well, they highlight how criminal groups, like cartels, actually adapt to these kinds of interventions. They often get more decentralized, harder to pin down. So unilateral strikes might actually inflame cartel violence. It could destabilize the border regions even more, maybe even spark reprisals in the U.S.
The dreaded blowback effect.
Exactly. And then there's history. Past U.S. military adventures. Think the 1916 chase after Pancho Villa, or more recently Iraq, Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
They're all seen as cautionary tales here.
What's the consistent lesson from those?
High costs in lives and money, a strong nationalist backlash in the country you enter, and usually a long, drawn-out conflict, not a quick fix.
So this raises a really important point, I think. Why are international law and sovereignty such powerful barriers in practice? Why can't they just be pushed aside if a country feels threatened? It's because they're basically the foundation for, well, somewhat stable relations between countries. If you start ignoring them, it sets a really dangerous precedent. It can unravel cooperation built up over decades.
It risks chaos, essentially.
Pretty much. And those historical lessons, they aren't just stories, they show patterns. Military force often acts like a filter. It might disrupt criminal networks for a bit, but it forces them to evolve. They become more scattered, maybe more adaptable, often more brutal. It can turn into this endless game of whack-a-mole that destabilizes things more than it solves. So for you listening, it's really worth thinking about those wider ripple effects. They go way beyond the immediate target.
That's clear. But, we sometimes see political leaders push boundaries, especially when they frame something as a national security crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Do the sources mention any counter-arguments, maybe from a more hawkish view that downplays these legal hurdles?
It's interesting, the sources really emphasize the expert consensus here. While some political rhetoric might sound aggressive, the strong feeling among analysts and diplomats seems to be that the legal and diplomatic costs are just too high to ignore. There isn't really a serious argument presented in these materials that suggests you can easily bypass fundamental international law or sovereign rights without facing, well, catastrophic consequences for U.S. foreign policy and security in the long run.
So the risks outweigh any perceived benefit in that view.
That seems to be the overwhelming assessment, yes. It's just too great a gamble.
Okay, so given these arguments against intervention, how does this all look from inside Mexico? What do the Mexican people and their leaders think about foreign military presence? Public opinion seems nuanced, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Polls show about 46% of Mexicans are open to joint U.S.-Mexico action against cartels.
But there's a catch.
Right, a huge one. That support is conditional on it being consensual, agreed upon, because a full 50% firmly oppose any kind of intervention at all.
So almost half are open to working together, but half are completely against any foreign boots on the ground, consented or not.
Essentially, yeah. There's openness to cooperation, but a very clear line against anything that feels imposed. And that line is really reinforced by the leadership stance. President Scheinbaum has been unequivocal. Foreign military presence infringes on Mexico's sovereignty, period.
And that's not just her political position today?
No, not at all. It's deeply rooted in their history. Mexico has this long-standing commitment, almost a national creed, to defend its sovereignty by land, sea, or air. It goes back centuries.
Right. And those historical and cultural reasons are just fundamental to understanding Mexico's position. We touched on it before, the history of interventionism they've faced. Protecting their independence isn't just a policy choice, it's like baked into the national psyche.
So that word consensual is absolutely key.
It's everything. It's the non-negotiable starting point for any discussion about joint action from their side. Without that clear, upfront agreement, any proposal, no matter how well-intentioned it might seem from the outside, is viewed as a violation. It's about not letting history repeat itself. That's the core of it for Mexico.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. Based on everything we've looked at in the sources, what's the likely outlook? What's the path forward here? Well, summarizing the key dimensions, the U.S. goal seems to be reducing fentanyl and cross-border crime. And the rhetoric can be aggressive. Plus, we see these new border zones, Mexico's position. They seem willing to accept intelligence help, maybe training and equipment, but draw a very firm line against foreign troops or airstrikes on their soil.
Sovereignty first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Legally and diplomatically. Unilateral strikes look like a non-starter, likely illegal, and incredibly damaging to the relationship.
And strategically.
The risk assessment is pretty negative. High chance of escalation, cartel adaptation making things worse, and serious backlash.
So the current path seems less dramatic. More focused on that support role training, gear, intel sharing, no boots-on-the-ground intervention.
Right. So our final take, synthesizing all this, is that full-scale U.S. military intervention in Mexico seems pretty unlikely in the near future.
The barriers are just too high.
Exactly. You've got the legal and diplomatic walls, Mexico's very strong opposition rooted in history, and just the sheer strategic risks involved. The more realistic path forward looks like enhanced U.S. support training, intel, equipment, but, and this is the critical part, operating under Mexican sovereignty.
They stay in the driver's seat.
Precisely. And the sources are pretty clear with their warning. Aggressive moves like airstrikes or sending troops would almost certainly backfire, politically, strategically, for both countries.
Yeah, it really underscores this incredibly intricate balance, doesn't it? It's a constant diplomatic tightrope walk. The challenge isn't just tackling problems like fentanyl, it's doing it in a way that respects sovereignty, avoids making things worse through unintended consequences, and keeps that vital U.S.-Mexico cooperation alive for the long haul. It's a very delicate dance, like you said. Every step matters, and the past definitely casts a long shadow.
And that really brings us to the end of this deep dive. It seems clear that while the talk can be tough and there are definite actions at the border, the most likely way forward, for now, is cooperative support, not direct military intervention. And that's largely because of this mix of legal, diplomatic, and strategic realities, all amplified by Mexico's deep-seated historical stance on its own sovereignty. So as you think about all this, here's maybe a final thought to chew on. Given these profound concerns about history and sovereignty on both sides, what does this whole situation tell us about the limits of using traditional military force to solve complex border-crossing problems in our interconnected world today? And what other kinds of solutions, what alternative paths might need to emerge?